So, Michael, I think we're gonna kick off by talking about your new album, Tender Symmetry, which has got quite an interesting story behind it. This one, you didn't go about this in a very conventional way, did you? So why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. I think it's really the majority of people who are trying to make a professional career out of being a composer, I think have this almost daily challenge about how much of this is my job, how much am I doing stuff because I have to do it to pay the bills, or because the producer wants me to do it, or because the music library wants me to do it, or whoever, and how much am I an artist who is designing projects right from the start? How much am I writing because I've got something that I want to say, and I've got a way that I want to say it? And the tension between those two sides of being a professional composer is something I think that most of my peers that I talk to experience in a really visceral way pretty much every day, one way or the other. And so for me, over the last 5 years particularly, I started working with a record label called Erased Tapes. And they're based down in East London and with a sort of half a foot in Berlin. And working with that label has been sort of almost the beautiful diametric opposite of working on a telly show.
Or a Hollywood movie.
Or a horrible Hollywood movie. Yeah. And because for Erased Tapes and Robert, who's the boss there and the creative force behind the label, then what's crucial to him is that everything that goes out on that label has been thought through and polished and unpolished, if that's the authentic thing to do, and really has a reason to exist. And sometimes I think as composers, the achievement that we feel, if you are doing primetime telly, which is always really, really fast, then for me sometimes the sense of achievement that you feel is the fact that you finished on time. Yeah. The fact it's actually made it.
There is some music.
There is some music
that exists. Yeah.
It's Sunday 9 o'clock, and it doesn't just stop 2/3 of the way through, which by all sort of human laws of physics it should. You shouldn't have been able to finish it. Whereas the now Tender Symmetry, which is the second album that I've done for Erased Tapes, took like 2.5 years from having an original idea to then going round, in the end, 7 historic locations around the different parts of the country, 6 of which were found through the National Trust. And going to each of these places one at a time, visiting them, doing effectively like a film recce and sort of poking in all the areas that the general public are not allowed to go to, and what's in that dusty attic, and finding the really interesting sounding spaces, going back home, writing a piece, and then going back to the tunnel, to the ruined monastery, to the modernist house, and recording inside the spaces themselves. And I think part of the process, the long nature of this physical process, just there's a lot of late night van trips and travel lodges and the usual sort of mechanics of getting musicians and engineers and gear up and down the country, was to really sort of break a lot of the habits that we find ourselves in with film and TV through expediency, because we have to. Yeah. And really the sort of the time for experimentation is not on reel 7 of that action movie when it needs to be on the scoring stage at 10 tomorrow. In a way, for me, Tender Symmetry and making that second album now for Erased Tapes is a way to make sure that the two parts of being, for me anyway, 2 parts of being a composer, one which is the sort of technical, practical, professional one, and the other which is the artistic one, where you are really trying to find the thing that you feel is important and that you want to find a way to say, trying to keep those two things in balance.
Yeah. And when you were in the historical space, did you turn up with a piece of music and play it as you wrote it, or did you play it and then adapt it there and then to the sounds you were hearing on the day?
It's really interesting because it's it's again a sort of diametric opposition in terms of when you go into Abbey Road or Air or any of the studios, then a tremendous amount of intelligence and hard work by all the staff has been put into controlling everything. So there should be no extraneous noises. Not always true at Air, but there shouldn't be, and everything should be just as you expect it to be because there's a lot of other work to do. So one of the self-imposed challenges of going around to all these locations and recording outside as well. So we had at two of the locations. One had chosen this beautiful 16th century manor house that was up in the northwest near Liverpool. I hadn't quite looked at the map, so it was in fact half a mile from Liverpool Airport, and I did want to record outside. So literally there are much cleverer and harder working people than me with on their phones with the flight times for everything going off to Malaga and various holiday destinations, and we'd record in between the flights. Mostly that worked until like a light aircraft decided that it was going to buzz round deliberately, I felt. I think awful. Then a sort of a process of curation, and I think as well in terms of sort of learning from making the record and learning from what's different, and what I probably do slightly differently now than I might have done a few years ago, is the process of curation. And I think curation can tend to be it's kind of slightly overused word, and it's sometimes used to disguise a lack of real thought, because if you say you've curated something, then it makes you sound more clever. And so you kind of go, oh yeah, I've moved the salt and pepper shakers around in my kitchen, so now I've just curated a kitchen exhibit. No, you haven't really. But I think for me, the idea of curation is closer to what you and I might think of as editing. And editing your own work, making choices, carrying on making choices, being really super honest with yourself about what's working and what's not working, and giving yourself the time to do that is something that I feel that I've definitely not done for myself in the past. I've kind of got to like a second draft and thought, that is fine, out the door, release that. Whereas I think what I'm doing, maybe I'm just less decisive now, I'm middle-aged, but what I'm doing more now is going round things and round things and round things and really trying to find what the essence of them is. And in a way that's easier with an album because you're in charge of the release date. You can just keep moving it, and we did. And so it's sort of, and the same with the artwork. Erased tapes are known for their incredible packaging and beautiful artwork, and that just doesn't happen on the first draft. The people in Berlin, the design agency that Erased Tapes work with, are absolutely top of the game, win all the awards, the place to go. And yet, you get sent stuff, and you kind of go, what's this? What were they thinking? What were you thinking? And every amazing cover or every amazing piece of art always feels like it's been through lots and lots of really quite rigorous editing to get to that thing that seems really beautiful and really simple.
When you're sort of curating the album as a whole, how did you attempt to get some kind of overarching, unifying theme that kind of ran through the thing? Because the acoustic spaces must have been very different sounding.
Definitely, and that was one of the sort of the major elements to trying to make a record that worked, was when to be kind of purist about what the tree sounded like in that room, or when to go, I think it will tell the story of this piece better if we break out the Bricastes and do a lot of cheating. And so I made a decision really early on that I didn't want to make a kind of a wildlife record where it was. I always remember back in the day, if your mum and dad were a certain generation and had a certain sort of record collection, there would be a demonstration LP in there that almost certainly was of steam trains coming through a tunnel. And as a kid, he put these on, and these were amazing because it sounded just like a steam train coming through a tunnel. But it doesn't really withstand repeated listening. Yeah. So I didn't want to have to make a record where it was sort of gimmicky. And so when you got to the next track, you could go, oh, look, it's Liverpool Airport, or this is the sort of... So as part of the editing and mixing process, we were trying to really kind of... And because you can now, trying to take out the things that we wanted to take out and leave in the things that we did, so that we could get not a kind of sort of superficial sense of movement between places, but actually bring out some of the characteristics and the texts that I used, which were all William Blake. And so if you take some Blake poetry from the late 1700s and sing it in a building that is from the 1100s, it has a really different context to if you sing it in a modernist house in Hampstead from 1930. Yeah. And so there were these through lines, and really what you end up looking for are the things which are the more subtle differences, because I think that's where the interest really lies.
You're probably best known as a TV composer. What's your kind of process when you're writing for TV or for a film? Perhaps more specifically, how do you get started? And that's always of interest to people who don't sort of operate in that sphere. Like, when you've got a completely blank slate, where do you go?
High-end telly is a brilliant place to be in if you are interested in trying to create new musical worlds right now, because when you score a film, chances are, unless you're lucky and get on the first film of a long-running franchise, which is kind of like the Willy Wonka golden ticket thing, if you get hired again. But usually with a film, if it's a British independent film, it's going to be a one-off. You're going to have to create a single world really quickly. And so basically, you're going to have 90 minutes in which to try and create something hopefully unique and interesting that serves the story. But with high-end TV now, or any TV, if it's episodic, then there's always this thought in the back of your mind if you get a call to do episode 1 of the first series of a new show, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this might be about trying to create a musical world which can sustain itself over 5 series or more. Yeah. And so, in a way, I think that thought about what's the musical universe that this show exists in kind of starts the meter running and starts the kind of the thought processes, because I think if you don't allow yourself any thinking time at all, even if the schedule is super, super tight, then what you'll do is default to your habits, which we all do. And I imagine most of the writers here would, if it was like a speed challenge and somebody sat you down at your computer now and said, you've got 30 minutes to do a 2-minute cue, like everybody, or not everybody, but like 95% of people in the room would go for a felt piano and a soft strings patch and maybe something that's a bit wishy-washy that they made on Omnisphere. And you'd get there, and it would sound like because we all do that. You would go to that place. If you start your demo process for a new project and you've not given yourself any time to try and go through that and through the next thing and through the next thing to find something interesting, you will just repeat yourself. So often, I write a lot with David Arnold, and so when we're doing Sherlock together, usually the time when we're thinking about what a new episode or a new season might sound like is on the walk to and from the script read-through. So if you do get a chance to go to script read-throughs, if you're doing a drama, even if it's a short film, it really doesn't matter. They're much more interesting than going on set, because like filming is really quite boring, unless. And that sounds mean. And if there's sort of filmmakers here, your job is beautiful and empowering and wonderful.
And boring.
And boring, also boring. But because of the speed of setting up and checking the lights and actually the mechanics of filming, being on set, I don't find as visceral and kind of thought-provoking. But a script read-through is amazing because it's basically, that's the cast, and they read the story through in real time, but just in a dusty church hall somewhere in North London. Yeah. And you get a real sense, it's sort of, there's enough information, but not too much information, so it can spark off. You kind of go, oh yeah, no, I get this now. Yeah. And then, so the walk to the read-through, David and I, or just me, if it's something I do myself, might kind of go, oh yeah, I think I know what this is going to be. It's going to be kazoo and church choir or whatever it is. And then you go to the read-through and you go, no. So, and the conversation is so much more animated on the way to the pub after the read-through, because you're going, kazoo's never going to fly. That's a terrible idea. Who had that?
That's kind of a standard line.
Yes.
Like, really.
Rarely does that work. Because at that point, you start to get that kind of adrenaline rush, that kind of tingle in the end of your fingers where you're kind of going, okay, right, we're on now. This is a real thing. That's real actors reading amazing writing. There's a story. There's something to respond to. And then for me, it's about sort of trying to kind of surf the wave then of that excitement and adrenaline and pressure and deadlines and changes. And really, it's kind of like that's the start of it, and the finish of it is when it's on at the multiplex or on the telly. Yeah. Because between that point and the start point and the end point, there really isn't any let up, no. as you know better than most in the room.
Yeah. So do you find that script read through like more inspiring actually than seeing the first cut, for example?
I think it feels like by the time you get a rough cut, by the time that you see images from how it's going to be, I feel like I'm already a bit into the process. Yeah. Therefore, those jobs, of which there are many, where either maybe you're picking up because somebody else hasn't worked out on it, and you just get 3 weeks to do a version, or maybe the producers didn't choose their composer very early, or there's a 1,000 reasons why you might be brought on quite late in the project. But at that point, it's almost like looking at a rough cut and starting to make a cue sheet and starting to get involved in the practicalities of it is already too late to really have blue sky ideas.
Yeah, I was going to say that my experience of doing a temp score, even attempting to write bits of music for film, is that the structure's basically laid out in front of you, and you're kind of thinking how many. You're thinking in terms of this is right. There's 16 bars between here and here at 80 BPM, and that's not really music you're thinking about. Then you're really thinking about maths almost.
I think it's exactly that, because to really find a kind of like a fluidity as a media composer, somebody writing to picture, you have to have both of those elements. So somehow you have to be really fluid with the mechanics of it, so that if you're kind of, and it's funny, James and I briefly before were talking about the kind of like how techie film and TV or composing in general has become now, and whether that kind of favors a certain kind of writer and puts another kind of writer off the project. And it's interesting because maybe some of the messages that composers ourselves send out, or lovely tech companies like Spitfire send out, is that the tech is the thing that is going to get you the job, or if you already have the job, your choice of reverb plugin is going to be the thing that really makes the difference. And it really isn't. Like, it massively isn't that. But what it feels like it is the fluency that you have on your instrument, and your instrument as a composer these days probably is your computer, is really important. Just because that's the way that you're going to get your ideas across. It's the way that you're going to respond to changes, is by being able to fluently work with your machine. Now, it doesn't matter whether your machine is in fact 10, 15 years old. Nobody cares whether or not it's this year's samples, last year's samples, this year's plugins, last year's plugin. That doesn't matter, but your fluency with it does. And I'd probably say, and this is the wrong place to say it, but I'd probably say sort of keeping hold of a smaller range of equipment and getting to know it better will serve all of us, speaking to myself included, will serve all of us better than the sort of constant anxious path of upgrade when you don't feel fluent with what you've got. Because I think James is absolutely right. As soon as you see the cut in front of you, as soon as you load it into a sequencer, which, again, totally irrelevant which one you use, but as soon as you load it in there, it's already got straight lines all over the screen. It's
And you look at it at 60 BPM or whatever it starts at, and you think, oh, that hits that. Oh, I'll leave it at 60 and off we go. Yeah.
I think if it's one of those things where if there was a charitable donation for every cue that was written at either 60 or 120 and in 4/4, then there would be a lot more good in the world. Just because that sort of defaulting to the structure that's laid out in front of you is incredibly understandable. And so I think that the balance between your blue sky, and I think I'm probably going to keep coming back to that because that's sort of why I do the albums, is about balance. And I think what I try and get into film and tele music process-wise is a balance between the two things. And I know when I'm not satisfied with something, which is most of the time, I think most of the composers that I know, their default position, if you try and compliment anybody on their score, they won't take it. And they kind of go, I didn't really know, wasn't any good that. And then if you push them at the bar and go on, there must be a bit that you liked. Most composers with most scores can usually find like one cue that'll go, it's not quite as shit as all the rest. and for them, you kind of go, okay, so the one that you're not just deeply ashamed of, what is it that you feel better about that? And they won't kind of go, oh, it fitted very neatly into 114 BPM and my bloody damage loop worked really nicely. What they'll be saying is that they had an idea, like not a practical idea, a musical, emotional idea, and they managed to realize it in such a way that the combination of it and the story made something emotionally meaningful. If you overbalance in either direction, if you're too techie, and most ex-music editors, that's a problem for us because that's why we're sort of hopefully reasonably good music editors, is because we had some of those skills. So I find that you have to rebalance and really push the blue sky stuff, or else your music ends up quite boring. Also, I meet some, beautiful, beautiful musicians, young musicians, songwriters, instrumental composers, and I just know that as they are in that moment, to throw them into the bear pit of an independent movie or episodic TV particularly is just unfair, because their blue sky ideas are absolutely beautiful, but their technical fluency just isn't enough for them to survive. And so finding that balance and constantly working on that, I think, is what is at the heart of being a composer, media composer.
I think so, yeah. And you're fighting as well in terms of your fluency with the fluency that young editors are now obtaining on editorial machines and visual effects and so on that are changing so much more quickly than they used to.
I mean, and kind of rightly so. I gave myself a talking to, which is something that I have to do regularly, but a particular show, really young editor, and it kept changing, and it kept changing a lot. And I was getting grumpier and grumpier about it. It's like, I am not conforming this in thing anymore. It's like, I'm going to send you the track. You just do it. And I took myself to one side and I went, why is that person doing what they're doing? Are they genuinely doing it to try and make this show better? And had to concede, yes, they were. In general, are the changes they're making it better? Sadly, yes, they are. They are making it
annoying.
Yeah, not exactly, already annoying. And so consequently, look into your heart, oh ex-Northerner, and go, is it just that you don't want to do it because it's irritating and you're grumpy? Or do you also want to try and make this show the best it can be? Yeah. And I had to sort of just go, yeah, okay, so you're going to have to find a way to breathe through this and not be personally annoyed every time the notes come through from the director, the producers, the editors, all the interested parties.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty is, and again, you and I have been on projects like this, is when that relationship of trust and respect does really break down, and you're still up at 4 a.m, but the thought in the back of your mind is, I'm not sure that we're doing this to make this any better.
No.
I think we're doing this for other reasons.
When you're doing episodic TV, like a long-running show, how do you sustain your own interest in that music that you're writing, and how do you attempt to sustain the interest of sort of the watching public?
I think it's really interesting because it feels like the consumption, and this is not, I'm not the first person to talk about this, but it feels like the consumption of TV has changed and changed very fundamentally in the last few years. So the move from day and date TV watching, from sort of scheduled TV watching, or at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, that's when your show played, and then you waited for a week. Then we had the sort of the first iteration of it, which was time shifting on various forms of sort of slightly more sophisticated digital set-top box type recorders, and so people then started to time shift, but at that point weren't really box set watching. And then DVD box sets themselves became a thing, but they were after the event, so if you're a fan, you watched it when it went out, but you collected the box set. Really started to shift with Netflix and other services, where, I mean, we do it at home. My lovely other half there, hello. If we find something that we like, we watch like all of it as much as possible, kind of peering through, should we just one more? Well, I don't know, what time is it? And consequently, not only are you now looking at how a series might play week by week by week. So I do a show called Unforgotten on ITV, which the third series of which is just went out in the summer. And the balance now in viewing figures between people who watched it on the night and people who watched it on, this is even catch up, so sort of within the week after, it's about half and half now, which is nuts. It used to be such like significantly more people will watch it when it went out. But you only get the numbers much later for the people who actually, even with that, waited until the last episode so they could watch all 6, because they didn't, our attention spans are not long enough to wait several weeks to find out who done it in a whodunit. Deeply annoying. And so from a composer's point of view, really your sense of how big the arc is, how big the world is based on a slightly different view of musical memory than it used to be. Because traditionally the theme tunes, the signature tunes, which have sort of come in and out of fashion, but for the longest time have been crucial. Have been crucial because they were calls to action. When EastEnders first started, which for most people in this room will be a time before the dinosaurs, but there was a time before EastEnders. And there was a big hoo-ha at the time about the theme with those excellent toms as the introduction. And I think it was Simon May, the composer for that, was interviewed, and I saw him talking about it, and he just said, it's a call to action if you're in the kitchen making a cup of tea. It's like you need to know the show's on. You need to know, not in 15 seconds of ambient drones that the show's on. It's a soap. You want to know it's on. You want to know it's on now. It needs to sort of capture your attention and brand in a way that the show. In a world of Netflix where they, depending on what service you're watching, where it skips the opening title sequence, then what are you trying to say? Are you do you just assume that it's now really irritating to have a theme because that's the only reason that those services which are data-driven would program to skip it, is that enough people, they can measure who is skipping it and they think they should automate it. Also, in terms of cue reuse from one episode to another as well, the sort of thing that you might think, oh, this is an interesting callback, but it was 3 weeks since they've heard it as an audience member, so I'm going to have to really ham this up. if it's only 3 hours since you've last heard it, then you can expect a memory of themes and different sort of musical signatures. So I think there are some technical issues that come under the category of memory, but then also I think really there's an engagement for the 1 in 100 shows that really goes, like a Game of Thrones or a House of Cards or perhaps a Sherlock. You become part of a very focused, very passionate, committed world of people for whom their camaraderie and relationship about being a Game of Thrones fan, a Sherlock fan, is meaningful and important to them. And to misquote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. It kind of, it's simultaneously an incredible privilege to be a musical part of that world, but also, kind of, sometimes challenging.
Yeah. And do you conceive of the entire series as you might conceive of a film, for instance, therefore, because you know that a lot of people will be watching it almost like a film?
I think now, like a 6-episode run, definitely is just like each episode's a really long reel, really, for sort of film people. Sherlock is 390s, so that's, again, we kind of usually, by the time we're doing the first one, we know what the other 2 are. We might even have seen them. So you're looking all the way to the finish line. I think that the challenge is you never want to detach from the story. If the story goes in a direction that you hadn't predicted in a new series, you sort of have to follow it. You have to follow the rules that you've set up. So with Unforgotten, we'd set up in the first season a structure. So within the first episode, you meet a series of characters, and then at the end of the first episode, there's the reveal of who the victim is, and we try and get to know them personally, and that's the end of episode 1. And then 2, 3, 4, 5, you find out more and more about all the different characters, and then by the end of 5, you probably find out who's done it, and 6, you find out why probably they've done it. And so that's the structure, and it's been similar for each of the 3 series. And so the producers and director, who are all amazing, really attached to the music for the first series, because for them it was meaningful for the structure of the whole story as well as just for those characters. So originally the themes in series 1 of Unforgotten was supposed to be, or in my mind anyway, were character themes for those specific characters. But then as we talked about it for season 2, and as people started to attach to that show, it became clear that the producers wanted those themes to be more universal. Yeah. So actually that theme from episode 1, which might have been Kathy's theme there, is actually a theme about hope or a theme about redemption. And then actually something really interesting happens, because if you play a theme in a sort of conceptual way, it's about grief. It's about kind of the possibility of hope in the future. And you play it over different people, you get a really a very quick way of seeing the differences between people and the universality of people. Yeah. My favorite music editor example of that is in Love Actually, that I had the great privilege of being on for quite a long time. And there's a green shoots theme in Love Actually, and it will be on this Christmas again. You will never can escape Love Actually. But if you listen out, there's a little clarinet melody that is used from Craig Armstrong's lovely score, that is used whenever any of the characters fall in love. And the first time you see it is when Hugh Grant's slightly creepy prime minister falls for his secretary, and you hear this little clarinet melody. And then the second time you hear it, I think, is with Alan Rickman. And then the third time you hear it is with Liam Neeson and his little kid. And by then, it's a beautiful filmic device, because if the first time you heard it was with Liam Neeson and the kid, it wouldn't get a laugh. It would just be a bit of romantic music. But because by now you've associated this with the sort of the wonderful silliness of adults falling in love. Then when you play it over the kid, there's a whole new layer, because it's, oh my God, the kid falling in love as well. and so it's a really sort of wonderful, from a kind of film music grammar point of view, a really wonderful example of using what could be character themes, using them as idea themes, and getting another layer out really of the music.
What do you think you should not do if you want to become a film or TV composer?
I'm very good on this. Like, I've got a big long list of things not to do. Prepare yourselves. So let's do social media, because I feel quite strongly about social media. Social media is not the work. Social media is okay for talking about the work. Social media isn't the work. And I think so often there is a real sense that when you're trying to establish yourself as a composer, or anything in the arts particularly, where you feel that you need to promote yourself because you feel that you need to compete with the noise that's coming from everyone else, and everyone else seems to be at a premiere and on a red carpet or releasing their own EP, all of which are good things, but that's not the work. The work is you at your desk writing music and getting better. That's where the work is. So I think just checking in with yourself about your use of social media is interacting with how you are feeling and growing as a person and as a musician is super important. It's incredibly addictive. I delete and reinstall the 3 major social media apps almost on a weekly basis, like sort of weird phone addict, because I know it's bad, and yet, oh, hey, I've got a thing I want to tell everybody about, so I better reinstall Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I think it's a unique challenge that just wasn't on the table 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't something to really think about, but how can you reclaim your time as a fledgling or more than fledgling composer, so that you're really focusing on what's really important, which is human relationships and getting good at what you do, neither of which are really demonstrated on social media. You tend to you see the surface of other people. If anybody cares about what you do, and often when I post stuff on social media, all you're left with is a sense of, well, I'm just barking into a waste paper bin. Nobody hears it or cares. If you're sort of sincere about developing your long-term craft, then that is the thing that will give you long-term satisfaction through the times when you get fired off stuff and have a lot of knockbacks. I'm supposedly, I guess, in that sort of middle period of a career where you'd imagine from the outside that it's fairly smooth sailing, because I've done enough stuff that I would probably get booked to do some more stuff, you'd think. But I get regularly fired and regularly down to the last 2 for jobs that I definitely think should be mine, and somebody else gets them. And I don't put those up on social media, because why would you torture yourself? And so consequently, if you look at my feed, you go, God, he's doing really well. He's like 2 or 3 big shows, and then another film's coming out and an album and everything. So it's a really unrealistic sense of what other people are like. Number 1 in my list of what shouldn't you do, or what would I recommend, because you can do what you like, but what would I recommend you don't do, is not use social media, but really actively look at where the balance of it is in your life, and how much effort and time and resources and your attention are you spending on actually developing your craft, and how much are you spending watching Christian's very entertaining videos or other things online, because that isn't the work. It's not the samples aren't the work. Your computer's not the work. None of those things are the work. Find out for you what the work is and dedicate yourself to that, because that will still provide you with beauty and meaning and purpose in 40 years' time. And I guarantee that Instagram post you're thinking of doing on the way home from this will have gone a long time before that. Being enormously privileged enough to have had a life up till now predominantly writing music, or at least moving other people's music around, or writing other people's music in the background, or all these different roles over the years, has just renewed my long-term faith and belief in the fact that music is beautiful and important, and in its very essence, adds to the common good. And that's an incredibly privileged world to even spend some time in. But because it is that powerful and beautiful and moving contribution to all of us as humanity, then I think taking a serious view of yourself as a person and as an artist is an appropriate response to that. And consequently then, once you've got rid of worrying too much about what font you're using on your website and whether it's mobile compatible and how many hits you've had in SoundCloud and those kind of things, once you've put all that to one side, you're then able to try to, in practical terms, put yourself into the world, engage with the world so that you're where people are telling stories. So to phrase this in what not to do, another thing not to do is not hang out with musicians. Totally pointless if you're trying to get a job, because if you're hanging out with other composers, they're literally competing for it. And I have been in the pub with people where they've gone, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they go, "Oh yeah, I'm looking at this new show." And they go, "Uh-huh. What's the production company?" And then you find out later on, obviously their agent's called up. And particularly if you're ever in the pub with an agent, just never speak. Just get them to buy the beers and just stay silent for the evening. As composers who write for film, who accompany stories and try and bring stories to life, you need to find the storytellers. So there's some brilliant film organizations. BAFTA is a really professional organization with really high standards. But there are student filmmakers. The BFI is another great institution. The London Film Festival is on right now. I think, is it still going? If not, it's around this time of year. These are places where filmmakers congregate. Meet them, befriend them, not in a creepy way, and try and work out what their drive is. Try and get onto the same wavelength as them, so that you're not just trying to sell them a service. You need to establish yourself and understand what it means to be a storyteller at the same time. So don't twat about on social media. Don't hang out with musicians. And the last one is don't spend all your money on gear. It's not the most frequent question. It's the most frequent arc of disappointment and humiliation that the students exhibit. Are the ones who come and sit in my studio on the sofa around this time of year. So they've just graduated, and it might have gone well or gone badly, but they've finished, and now they're sent like sort of blinking moles out into the rest of the world. It's kind of like, okay, so when do I start being a composer? Is it now? And at that point, I always frustratingly tell them that I think it will be 10 years before they make a living as a composer. And they've told their mum and dad it's going to be by Christmas. And so there's this big sort of gulf between the reality of what it's like to try and make a living. It doesn't matter whether you're writing library music, film, TV music, doesn't matter what you're doing. It's a long ball game. But then how do you sustain yourself for that period of time? How do you keep yourself well and happy and motivated and fed and pay your rent or just live with your parents for 10 years or whatever it is that you're going to do? And this constant sort of consumerist sense of that you have to, like I've done a Spitfire Cribs video and I felt really conflicted about doing it because I've got loads of expensive gear. And that's not what I want to say to young composers, but I've got it. So, just to be in a broom cupboard with a laptop would be disingenuous and weird. So, but I sort of was at pains during the Cribs video to try and get over the point that that the gear totally is not the thing. If you could take, let's say that you've spent, and I bet most people in this room have, let's say £10,000 over your lifetime of buying gear. So that includes your computer, the computer you've got now, the one that you traded up because, hey, it wasn't powerful enough because it didn't run the new sample libraries that you bought, and the plugins, and the controller keyboard, and hey, everybody says you have to acoustically treat your room or else your music sucks. All these things, if you take however much your shame value of money is, and be really realistic with yourself, and then break that down into a weekly subsistence budget, like we used to do when we're students, when it's like, I've got 60 quid, baked beans are 40p a tin if you have the cheap ones, and you can get that white bread that's made out of, I don't know what it is, but you can live.
Lasts for 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. And a very unnatural length of time. Then that 10,000 quid could have bought you a year. Like, I mean, you would need some sort of gear, but you don't need the fanciest. You need time. You need time to let yourself develop. You need time to feed yourself. And again, wrong place to preach this. But I really think if you invest in yourself, I think that message about investing in ourselves has slightly been hijacked because it's been slightly knocked off center to mean buy yourself expensive shit. And I'd love to nudge it back the other way and go buy yourself time. Buy yourself time to not buy new things, but get good at the things that you're on. Buy yourself time to go and listen to much better music than any of us are writing, which has been written by whatever your flavor of greats, whether it, so on my Kindle thing right now, I'm reading about Benjamin Britten, who is a deeply flawed character, but a fascinating character. And basically reading about any composer that you consider to be great, I guarantee will be inspiring, even if you think they're obnoxious or an idiot or you don't agree with any of the things that they did or said. But it gives you something to inspire you. And that particular biography was on special offer $1.99 on the Kindle. Didn't even have to buy a book.
So I was going to ask you about the importance of playing live, because I know that you have your trio and you go around the world and still perform. And I was also going to talk to you more generally about collaboration. You write with David Arnold, for instance, but also how you collaborate with musicians, whether you collaborate with musicians. In fact, you just said don't hang out with musicians. That was the second one. That was the second one.
Can hang out with some of them.
Yeah. But presumably in some contexts you are forced to hang out with musicians. And
despite trying to leave when they come in. I'm blessed by being quite bad as a player, which is really good. So I was a trumpet player through university, and I was pretty good, but not good enough really to harbor delusions that I was going to be the next principal of the LSO. Good enough to enjoy my playing. Piano for me was always the second study anyway, so all my psychological hang-ups and traumas are associated with trumpet, because that's the one that I was supposed to work really hard at. I used to play the piano for fun, and so consequently, I actively enjoy playing the piano. It brings me a great deal of pleasure. I don't worry that I'm not any good. I write myself things that I can play. And so if it's too hard, I get Peter Gregson to play it on the cello or somebody else to do it. And so consequently, the joy of playing with fine musicians. I just did a show at the King's Place down the road. And really, it was the gratuitous act of a middle-aged man wanting to hear his music sung and played by wonderful, wonderful people and be in the middle of it. And I was sort of really conscious at the time to take active pleasure in doing that, to just kind of go, this is absolutely amazing. You get to sit amongst these glorious, glorious musicians who are realizing your music in a way that surpasses how it was in your head or on the page when you wrote it down. And there's something about the approach to challenging situations, fearful situations, the psychological sense of acknowledging how you're feeling. And so I didn't really play much live. I used to accompany contemporary dance classes when I was in my 20s, and that was how I earned a very basic living. Which is, by the way, if you ever get a chance to play for a modern dance class, an improvised dance class, definitely do it, however rubbish you are, because it's one of the best trainings for film and TV music, because it's just instant composition. You have to get it, do something that's good enough right there and then, and if it's not good enough, people fall over and shout at you.
Yeah.
So
it's exactly like film then.
Yes, exactly. A lot of falling and shouting. But consequently, having sort of now kind of face the fear of what it's like to go and play, face that internal sense of shame, of not being good enough, of anxiety that you're going to screw it up, of just that sort of the kind of imposter syndrome that we all feel every time anybody hears a note of our music. To face that in a really specific moment, a time and a place, just to kind of breathe through it and do it, and then be able to go to the bar afterwards and share a pint with your fellow musicians. And that process I've found to, I don't feel necessarily that I needed to re-inject any joy into what I was doing, but enhanced massively. It made, somehow playing a fair bit on stage over the last 5 years or so has made sessions more fun. Because I conduct all my own stuff because I like being really present with the musicians, and I find it's the quickest thing to do. I'm a terrible conductor. In fact, I asked one of my, Anthony Whedon, who orchestrates for me and for RIP, orchestrated a lot of Johan Johansson's work, and Anthony's a proper conductor, can do it without a click and knows how it all works. And so I asked Anthony once to give me some lessons and say, yeah, I'd like to improve my skills. And we must have done it in the pub, because I got a call the next day from an amateur orchestra in Suffolk somewhere saying, we're so glad you've agreed to conduct our next concert. It's like, I really didn't, but apparently I did after hours maybe. So I conducted a whole concert of like Harry Potter and all those kind of things with a semi-professional orchestra in Suffolk. Before each rehearsal, I was actually physically sick with nerves, like proper, this is terrifying. And yet it sort of nudged me over some barriers of confidence or of feeling okay about that sort of stuff. So now when I conduct sessions, I think it's hilarious. When a 5/8 bar comes up that I've written, I should know where it is, and I conduct some random beat sequence with something, I just break out laughing. The musicians less so, clearly, but
yeah, they're very nice to you, the musicians in London. I think
they really are. I mean, they've seen them all.
They just roll an eye and carry on. So we're fine. We did the 5/8 bar.
Yeah, exactly. No, they were totally fine.
We're here when you catch up with us.
Just flapping about
here.
like a windmill. And
Yes.
just try and end at when they finish, and you'll be fine. Yeah. But that sense, I think a lot of composers, I think we spend a lot of time by ourselves, or we spend a lot of time internalizing things, and playing live, conducting, kind of getting out in the world allows you to externalize a lot of these slightly closed either musical thoughts or just sort of practical responses, and it's good fun, and it makes you a better composer all around, I think.
Okay, Michael Price, thank you very much.